Recording has started.
Good evening, everybody. We will call this meeting to order. If we can all please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thank you. So it's October 5th. It's generally our regular meeting, but tonight we'll be having our quarterly review, fourth quarter, 2021. So not only a quarterly review, but an end of year review too. And it's a typical schedule for end of the year, mixed with our quarterly. So tonight we have the chair of the Joint Retirement Investment Board. Wanted to make sure I got that right. So, Callan, thank you for being here and welcome. And then we'll go to the Board of Ed's year-end financial position, and then to the towns. So we'll get started with item number 3 to review the current status of the town's pension and Opeb funds. Callan, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. In your packet, you have a couple of presentations from us. If I could call your attention to the one marked Town of Fairfield Pension, please. Page 1 of that. Page 1 will show the portfolio performance and the asset allocation. For the period, 12-month period ending June 30th, 2021, the pension fund had a market value of $468.9 million. The 3-month performance was an increase of 6.25%. The 1-year performance was a positive 25.57%. It was a terrific year of appreciation for the funds. The allocation of the pension fund ending June 30th was 56% in equities, 30% in fixed income, 4.8% in real estate, 7.4% in private equity, and 1% in cash. If you would turn to page 2, this is a table of the performance, our net performance against our benchmarks. That's the first 2 lines of that slide. And I'm happy to say that for both the 3-month period ending June 30th and the 1-year period, we beat our benchmarks pretty nicely, the 200 basis points plus. On page 3, I'd like to, and I'll allow you to spend time on your own kind of going through this in detail. Something I'd like to point out here on page 3, toward the bottom, and this breaks down our performance by allocation category against our benchmarks by category, right, by fund. And toward the very bottom, you'll see private equity. We had an extraordinary year in private equity. The private equity portion of our pension fund was up 74% for the year, with one of the funds in particular, Mesero Fund 6, up 87%. I mean, really a spectacular performance from our alternatives for the year. If you'd like to see a little more of the private equity, we listed that out on page 5, and you'll see on that page the 5 investments that the JRIB has made into the pensions over the years. I think what's important to note on that is that the capital has largely already been contributed. We're on the other side of the J curve. We're receiving distributions from these funds. Our percentage funded column is the middle of that page, and you'll see that we've largely funded those investments, and that largely informed our view to increase our allocation to private equities going forward, and we'll get to that in just a second. On page 6, this is where you can really put into context how very exciting the year's gains were. This is a kind of a 10-year view of our performance net of fees. It really was a terrific year, driven by driven by the recovery post-COVID, driven by vaccination rates, driven by global growth rates being high, driven by an accommodative Fed, and also in part driven by the fact that we made the allocation change away from our consultant and into the OCIO strategy with Vanguard. And that really changed our equity allocation and our fixed income allocation to be very total market facing. So we're not trying to pick stocks or pick strategies. We were just exposed to the whole market. And in this case, timing was very good because it was a year ago, March of 2020, that we made the switch into the Vanguard funds. On page 7 of this report, you will see the cash flow summary for the funds. And the one thing I'd like to point out on that was the fiscal year to date column, which you'll see at the top, right, which is the beginning market value of kind of a year ago, 2020, the net cash flow in, the capital appreciation for the year of $92 million to the pension funds, and income earned of $5.7 million for the total ending value of $468.9 million for pension. I mentioned a change to our allocation in our September meeting. The JRIB, working hand in hand with our co-fiduciary Vanguard, decided to make some changes to the allocations, actually taking down the equity allocation. We reduced equity from 56% to 50%. We increased fixed income from 30 to 35%. We maintain 5% exposure to real estate, and we increased our private equity allocation, which had been 7.4 to 10%. Okay. Other changes that we've made in the JRIB, we did reduce our discount rate. We took it down from 7% to 6.9%. So not a major move, but pulled us below 7. And we've really had a good experience working with Milliman so far as our new actuary, and we hope that this next actuarial review will also be beneficial to you, working with Milliman. I can take questions on the pension, or I can roll right into Opeb. Which would you prefer?
Thank you, Mr. Bucco. Let's see if there's any questions on the pension. When is that review with the actuary? Is that in February or?
Well, we would like to be able to do some of it initially this next month in October, but generally it's over the winter time, right? We have to wait for those year-end numbers to be totally in, and then they go to work. So usually you have it by February.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Are there any questions on our pension fund? Okay. We may come back to that. Let's go to Opeb.
Okay, so Opeb, right? So you have a separate packet there for Opeb. Page 1, the kind of the layout of the packet's identical to pension. The market value of the Opeb funds as of June 30, 2021 was $76.1 million. Our 3-month performance of Opeb was 5.87% positive, and our 1-year performance for Opeb was a positive 30.3%. 30.30%. It really benefited from having a little higher allocation to the equities. Equity, we ended the year with an allocation that was equities 71.5%. Fixed income allocation was 18.5%, real estate 7.4%, and cash was 2%. Turning the page to page 2, you'll get a sense of kind of how we performed against our composite benchmark, and we beat our composite benchmark by over 250 basis points for the year. We don't have the private equity allocation historically for Opeb, and the reason was we didn't have a market value that was high enough to really warrant the investment we could make into the private equity funds. That changed with this great performance, and we'll talk about that allocation in just a moment. If I could call your attention to page 5, you'll see that historical performance of Opeb, and you'll get a peek at the last 10 years of performance, and put that into context. Again, we benefited from great timing. great market environment and having that equity exposure where it was. Page 6 is the cash flow summary. And this is where you'll see that we started the fiscal year with 52.8 million of market value. Our net cash flow in was 6 million. We generated capital appreciation of 16.1 million. We had additional income from our investments of 1.1 million, and we ended the fiscal year with 76 million in assets. On the allocation, so this was where we sat, the board had a long discussion about the allocation of Opeb in the September meeting, and we changed the allocation schedule. We reduced our equity allocation from 71.5% to 60%. We increased the fixed income allocation from 18.5 to 20%. We increased our real estate allocation to 10%. It had been 7.4. And we introduced a private equity allocation that will be 10% of the portfolio. It had been 0. We've decided on that to work with HarborVest as the private equity fund of funds. They're the partner with Vanguard. They offered us a terrific cost, and the HarborVest is one of the biggest and one of the best private equity fund of funds out there. So we'll benefit from their expertise and their team and their breadth. Same discount rate for Opeb as pension. We went from 7 to 6.9. Same actuary, working with Millman. This one takes a little bit longer to get the actuarial numbers in, but hopefully we'll get them to you for February. And I ran you through the change to the investment policy statement, the allocations.
I have to say, these are great reports. No? Very thorough, and they're readable, actually.
And they're readable. Yeah, we've worked hard with Vanguard, and Vanguard's done a really terrific job to make this as presentable as they can. And I'm glad to hear you think that it's easy to see.
Easy to see, and it's great to see. I like seeing the one-year comparison from 52 to 76. You know, for a while, years were hovering right under 50. You know, 40, 45, and we got to 50, and 12 months later, we're up over 75 million. So
it was a good year.
Can't count on that every year.
Yeah.
Life would be easy.
If it were this easy, we'd all be doing it.
So I wonder what percentage are we funded now for the town? I believe Opeb was always around like 30, 35% maybe. So we must have moved the needle a little bit.
Well, so remember, there's 5-year smoothing when they do their calculations. So, you know, we won't get the full benefit of it immediately, but it clearly will have an upward bias to the funded ratio of both plans.
Good. Thank you. Any questions? Ms. Charlton.
Thank you. Hi, Carolyn. Question: as the Opeb fund continues to grow in value, would the intent be to mirror the asset allocation of the pension?
Over time. Remember, the pension allocation is there in part because the pension makes distributions out of the pension fund, right? Yeah. Whereas Opeb, we're not making distributions. So it's a much younger part of its life cycle. So I think that the feeling of the board and Vanguard is it can maintain a little more risk-facing allocation than pension. But as you can see from the change that we made in September, I mean, you know, we're very happy to kind of pull the allocation to be a little more in line with where pension is.
Okay, thank you. And just one other quick question. You mentioned on the private equity we got a good deal in terms of cost. What is? But those are fund of funds, right? So which oftentimes have a double layer of fees. What are the fees on the private equity investments in these funds?
I didn't come prepared with the fee schedules. I'll follow up for you on them. I can tell you that we spent several months going through it, and the HarborVest fee schedule is quite a bit lower than the fee schedule at either our existing private equity fund of funds, right? And that was an opportunity that Vanguard has given to its clients.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Ms. Charlton. Mr. Walsh.
Well, thanks for being here this evening, and thanks for a very positive report. My question goes to, obviously, you guys are looking, you correctly stated that you changed the discount rate down to 6.9. Where's the board at JRIP stand with further reductions? What kind of conversations are you having right now, or have had in the last month or two, about reducing that any further? Because as we're coming up to budgeting season, we need to do that, and we don't want to get caught in a scenario that we got caught in a couple of years ago, where things were happening and whatever. So we just kind of want to. I'd like to have this board get some type of opinion from you, or dates on when decisions are going to be made, so that we fully know what you are going to be setting the discount rate at, or whether you're going to leave it the same.
Well, I can put your mind at ease that we have no ongoing discussions right now regarding the discount rate. The analysis that we did was in relative to our peer group, the funded status of the plans, and looking much more broadly at similar municipal plans that have a funded ratio like ours. And we're very comfortable with that 6.9. I don't envision that we will have any changes to that, at least for the next year, if not maybe longer.
At what meeting do you normally change the discount rate if you are so inclined to do so?
Yeah, so
which of the meetings is it? Because I think last couple of years ago it was a January big meeting or a February meeting or something like that. It was right in the middle of our budget.
Yeah, under my chairmanship, it's a July meeting.
Okay.
Okay, so I think we've talked about that, and I want to keep it away from the budget season, give everybody an opportunity to not create drama where there doesn't need to be any drama, and not surprise. So it would be next July that we would bring it up on the agenda.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Any further questions? I am seeing none. So, Mr. Bukov, thank you for being here. Appreciate it. Thank you for the report.
Have a good night.
You too. All right, we're going to go to item number 4 to review the Board of Ed fiscal 21 year-end financial position. So we have the Board of Ed here with us, and we want to welcome Ms. Courtney Laborious, our new Executive Director of Finance and Business Services for the Fairfield Public Schools. First time reporting to us, so we welcome you. And Mr. Cummings, we can turn it over to you, or Ms. Laborious. Up to you.
I'll just do a brief introduction. Mr. Brown, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having us. As Mr. Brown said, Ms. Laborious has joined us as Executive Director of Finance. We have told her that this is a very welcoming, open, friendly group of individuals, and that she should be at full comfort and ease. So she is ready to go, and we thank her for being here. And again, thank you to everybody for our report.
Thank you, Mr. Cummings. Not sure if that was the best prep, but
well, thank you, Mr. Cummings. Thank you, Mr. Brown, and thank you, Board, for giving me the opportunity to present the financials to you. So the first document I want to walk you through is the summary document, and it's titled Statement of Account Summary by Major Classification. I apologize that these documents aren't numbered. I will do that in the future for you so they're easier to find, but I'll give you a minute to locate that document. And this will be new to you, but it's not new in format. It's new, but it won't be new in information. This is a summary of all of the quarterly presentations that we've given to you to date. So you'll recognize on the top is the unencumbered balances, which is something that we've shared with you from our financial system of record from Munis. And then the bottom is a summary of the projected balances, which is a document that we create in-house at Fairfield Public Schools in the business office. and we walk you through each time. I thought that this might be a good starting point for me to give you a high-level summary. I spoke with the town and I was mimicking something that you're familiar with seeing on the town side. I'll walk you through. So the summary ties out to all the quarterly reports that have been shared in the past. It's by major classification. And the unencumbered balance on the top will go down over time. At the start of year, you encumber everything, for example, in your personnel expenses, but you wouldn't encumber part-time. So it would be different than your projected balances because, for example, your projected balances would include a projection of your summary of your part-time. So I'm going to go right down to the projected balances, and I want to focus on the adjusted balance as of 6/17/21 and the year end, as well as the transfers. The projected balance includes both the items that have been encumbered and those that we planned to encumber. So, and then this also at the bottom, I included a summary of the non-lapsing and the obligations against the non-lapsing funds. Just because for my ease of mind, I like to see it all in one place. Because we had shared with you the net position, but as you can see, how we recorded the obligations against the non-lapsing, how we presented it to you, changed a little bit over time because some things were captured in the Board of Ed fund and some things were captured in the non-lapsing account. But net is what we need to see. So in Q1, for example, we told you that we were at a negative 1.2, Q2, negative 1.3. But then as we refined our projections, we showed you a $400,000 surplus. When we went to the board for the transfers, it was with a zero balance. And then at year end, we closed with $116,000 to give back to the town. So there are four main takeaways from from our close. The first is that we closed with that $116,314. It represents less than 0.06% of the budget. And the second takeaway is that we had a need in pupil personnel that we shared consistently from Q2 that came to fruition and was covered with balances from utilities, from fixed charges, and also from school expense. The statement includes a transfer of $525,000 to the school nutrition program, and it accounts for a full spend down of the $3.633 million of the non-lapsing funds. So I'm going to go through just each of the categories briefly. So in the personnel services, we closed evenly. In Q3 and Q4, we had been projecting, and we shared with you a minor deficit of $130,000. That was a clerical error that represented one individual that was encumbered that should not have been encumbered. We reviewed practice and corrected so that won't occur in the future. But that's been cleared up, and so you can see that we closed with a $25,000 balance that we transferred to cover that need that I explained in pupil services. In the fixed charges, we closed with a small balance of $347,000. That represents about 0.82% of the total health insurance budget. And the reason being, now we consistently had that, been showing you that surplus or that balance since Q3. This was, as we got closer to year end, we refined the projection and found that we had a greater number of two-member families that were uptaking insurance than full family coverage. So that resulted in a minor change to the projection that yielded us a bit of a balance. The next one is pupil personnel. This was driven by a large need in pupil personnel services of about $1.3 million and tuition of about $1.6 million. And that was offset by transportation savings of about $1.6 million in the special education transportation account. So the net is $1.2 million of transfers that were needed for a total of $15.6 million of expenditures. This was reported back in Q2 and it remained consistent throughout the year and driven mainly by increase in overall need and expense for students without out of placement tuitions as well as related services. The school expense category closed with a residual balance of 500,000, leaving us to offset the need that I talked about in pupil personnel. This was because we curtailed school purchasing, mostly in supplies, books, and materials, because we were aware of that need. And so we did issue a freeze on that spending so that we could cover that gap. Support expense, we closed with a balance of a little bit over $257,000. But given that this is where we reflected that school lunch transfer that I spoke about of $525,000, we show a net of $240K negative. This category includes non-sped tuition, centrally funded instruction, and our central support operations. And the balance that we had left over was due to a freeze in spending that I mentioned earlier. In maintenance, we closed with a balance of $670,000, mainly due to savings in utilities related to the hybrid learning model and limited building use associated with kids being in the buildings less. This was reported to you throughout the year. It was offset by needs mainly in maintenance and professional services, including painting, HVAC, sidewalk repair. We held off on spending, so you can see, we were projecting when we talked to you in Q3, a bigger balance there to net to zero, but it turned out that we could complete the projects that we were planning because as we got closer to year end, Angelus was ready to go with all of his projects. Capital, we fully spent down after the release of the freeze for related that I spoke about earlier. So I'm going to pause there and see if there are any questions here. If that's okay, Jim?
Yes.
Or Mr. Brown,
it's okay.
yes,
That's
yes.
perfectly fine.
Okay.
Just as a reminder to the board, is this just a summary of the document we're used to seeing, titled Budget Transfers and Final Balance. So every as I'm looking at it, it matches the personal services, fixed charges, PPE. It's all, the details are on that one document, and it's just a summary. So we can go over that, the document that we're used to, the detailed document.
As well, yes.
But like we do with the town, we went through the summary first, which I think is very useful. So thank you. Mr. DeWitt, you had a question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, Chris DeWitt. Thank you, Ms. Laborious, for your first review. I love the overview. I think this is great. It's a nice way for you to, at a high level, talk through this. I just want to go back to the budget that was remaining on maintenance, operation, transportation. There was a couple things in there. You said for reasons of budget, and one of them was HVAC. So I'm a little confused how in wake, we're hearing some large HVAC numbers coming at us, but yet we're returning $600,000 of work that didn't get accomplished this year. So if you could explain that, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. So, and I'll also include my colleague that's here as well, Mr. Papageorge. But I wanted to say that just broadly that 671K is not in the general, although it's in the maintenance, operation, and transportation budget, mainly due to the utilities. So we mentioned that there was savings on the utilities account of about $1 million this year. So because we were in schools less, we were in a hybrid model, and our costs for utilities were down. We saw a large savings in utilities, and so I would say that all of the planned projects were completed as they were anticipated, and I'm going to defer to Mr. Papageorge, if I might, Mr. Brown, if that's okay.
That's fine. Thank you, Mr. Laborious. Mr. Papageorge?
Okay. Absolutely. I would have to concur with what Ms. Laborious said. Our planned projects we were able to get completed to move forwards with other projects during such times where we couldn't get materials, we couldn't get manpower, we couldn't get labor. It wouldn't have made sense to try to start projects that we didn't have already planned and on the books at this particular time because of such delays in manufacturing. And my concern was we'd end up with projects that were delayed months, if not almost a year, if we had tried to start them at that point.
So If I
Mr.
may,
DeWitt?
so I'm a little confused. I thought your first comment was we completed everything we wanted to complete, but then your final statement was, yeah, but I didn't want to start it if I couldn't complete it. So it sounds like there were things that were scheduled in this fiscal year that were not completed, basically due to the issues with the supply chain. So that's correct.
There was nothing that was scheduled for this year. There was stuff that we could have moved forwards with from upcoming years to try to get stuff accomplished. But because of, as you said, the delays, we did not want to chance moving that stuff around.
So basically, you couldn't do anything earlier. You had
Correct.
600,000 sitting around. And you're like, hey, maybe I can replace a window in school, and you're like, I can't get the windows. So instead of doing something like, okay, that's great, and that's a great explanation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. DeWitt. Ms. Charlton?
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Ms. Laborious, I just want to also thank you for the presentation. This is very clear and it's very helpful. I know it might make the schedule a little busy, but just one thought for the suggestion box. It might also be nice to have kind of the budget column in here so we know, how these numbers relate to the total in each of those areas. But my question is around the pupil personnel costs. Obviously, we were able to make up for those additional needs from elsewhere in the budget, but how do you, or maybe Mr. Cummings wants to address this, how do we think about that? Were these, temporary, for lack of a better word, costs that were related to COVID? Did we have a higher than normal spike of students that went out of district that we had to cover? Do we expect to maintain that level of cost? Can you just talk about that a little bit more and, with maybe a focus on how this trend would impact going forward?
I can answer that, but I think, is Mr. Mancusi on that he could
Yes, I
give a
am.
more detailed explanation? Thank you.
I'd be happy to answer the question. Obviously, we've been talking about how difficult it is to implement special education program during a global pandemic. I do believe that our costs in pupil personnel services and our costs in increase in tuition has increased. I don't want to say because of COVID, but COVID certainly has not made life easy for special education students and staff. So with the original closure back in March 2019, and then last year, a large part of the year being hybrid, special education is meant to be delivered in person. So I do think it's been a challenge. I think this year continues to be a challenge. So I do think that, we're going to have to just be very mindful and very attentive to trying to meet the needs of our students with disabilities and their families under less than favorable conditions. Did that answer your question, Mrs. Charlton?
Sort of. I guess, do I understand that to mean you expect that we'll continue to see the same level of costs going forward, at least in the short term?
I think this year is going to be the most challenging of the 3 years that we've been dealing with COVID.
Got it.
I think the answer is yes, right? The answer is yes. We expect it to go forward.
Okay. And did we budget adequately for that? I don't recall. Or are we going to be facing the same situation again where we're looking to, whether it be maintenance or other areas to kind of supplement a shortfall in pupil personnel costs?
We'll have a better look at that, if I might, when we come to our Q1 report for you. I think that's something that we're looking at with Mr. Cummings, Mr. Mancusi, and the whole Fairfield staff very, very carefully and closely. So we do plan to report out on that, and Mr. Mancusi is speaking with the Board of Education now about some details and information around that we'll be happy to share at the Q1 report. It's a little bit early still for us to make those projections. We just closed our first quarter, but we're looking carefully at it now. But also just anecdotally, I don't know if you want to share anything else, Mr. Mancusi. I mean, he did share that it is a challenging year.
We're in the process of collecting a great deal of data to share with the Board of Education soon regarding special education services that we'd be happy to share with you as well.
Okay. All right, that's helpful. Thank you. Look forward to future reports. And again, Ms. Laborious, welcome. Good to have you here.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Thank you, Ms. Charlton. Yeah, and that first quarter report will be November 16th for us. So, Mr. DeWitt?
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. So I want to talk about the second number that helped you backfill the pupil personnel expense, which is the school expense. I think you mentioned something about books. Could you elaborate on how you made up $500,000?
Sure. So that particular account is for support expense. I'm looking at. I'm so sorry. If you bear with me one moment.
Yeah, it's the school expense line that I'm looking at.
Yeah, it's overall supplies, books, and materials. We did ask consistently throughout the year, starting in Q3, for there to be a freeze on some expenditures that allowed us to balance the budget at the end of the year with necessary freezes. I can't tell you specifically what that is in that 400 that was planned that didn't get spent, but I'd be more than happy, Mr. DeWitt, to get back to you with that information. Mm-hmm.
Well, and listen, Mr. Mancusi's used to me taking body shots at him about budget expenses. But I'll tell you what, that school expense line item is constantly being decremented on behalf of pupil personnel. It's every year. So I am really curious what's in there. I feel like that's when we say we're forsaking book. You're not saying this, but I guess I'm saying it this way. If we're forsaking books because we're overrunning pupil expenses because of the budgeting process, then we need to really think about that, especially as we'll be entering a budget cycle here before we know it. So,
if I can, Mr. DeWitt, we will get you a full report, but I can tell you that, as my memory recalls, some of the things that we did hold off on was curriculum development work, professional learning work, things that, because of the pandemic, because of the different learning models, and because in March we were able to return full time, and we didn't want to have any further impact, excuse me, on in-class instruction. We just said that wasn't the priority this year. So there probably was some impact on materials and resources, but a lot of it was on some of the work that we need to do moving forward. And the issues and experiences that we were living under really prevented that from being done effectively anyway.
Yep. No, I get it. So I'd appreciate the data for the board, but yeah, I get it. A lot of our excuses are based around COVID, and I'm sure there is some I'm sure it was done with the right intent. Is guess what I'm trying to say. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. DeWitt. Mr. Walsh.
Chris, welcome to the district. I look forward to working with you. So I join my colleagues in welcoming you here this evening. Thanks for the new form. It is a little clearer. So thanks for your work on that already.
Thank you.
My first question for you is the transfer to the school lunch program for $525,000.
Mm-hmm.
Why did that need to be made? I thought this was kind of a self-supporting system. So why do we need to transfer $525,000 into that program?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Thank you. Actually did have that same question at my last district. When COVID started and the world stopped for schools in March of 2020, we had those 3 months where there was a lot of uncertainty, and that year there were shortfalls in school lunch program, and then that continued into the next year because when there's less kids in school, we're serving less lunches. It is supposed to be a self-sustaining program, and the federal government ought to have come up with a revenue source that didn't put it on the backs of schools, but you're not allowed to go into the red in those programs. In other school districts, lots of my colleagues had to do this as well. They typically carried a cash balance of anywhere between $400,000 and $600,000 from the time that they started. This just brought them up to their traditional cash balance where they would be were it otherwise. And we were concerned about what would happen this year. We can't be in a position to not be able to pay the staff to feed the children in the schools. We're still, I think, as a state, lobbying the federal government to provide additional resources for the school nutrition program, because I believe it's the position that other entities don't feel that it's the responsibility of the board to backfill, food needs. But this is what we've had to do. It was one of the options that was presented, and it did put us back in the black for this year. And I'm happy to report that we're doing better this year already with all of the kids back in school. And we're in the summer seamless program where we're reimbursed at a higher rate and lunch is free for all of our students. And even now we're seeing, a decent performance in the school lunch program this year. So hopefully that's temporary and it's been mitigated. And hopefully that lobbying will come to fruition where if we do get revenue back for prior years, we can speak with the town about how that gets reimbursed.
So if we do get reimbursed by the federal government, Mr. Cummings, are you making a commitment that you'll turn that back over to the town of Fairfield, taxpayers of the town of Fairfield?
Mr. Waj, I'd be hesitant to make any of that commitment right now. I think, first of all, we'd have to see, of course, the first question is if, right? We then have to determine where we were in that. But we certainly would open to conversations. I think that's part of our work going forward.
All right. Could you guys update us that on our future quarterlies on where that process stands every quarterly for like the next year?
Oh, absolutely, Mr. Walsh.
And then, is there a possibility that we may return to the normal amounts just on its own without this support?
We wouldn't. So as we look at the projections for this year, it's early in the year, but it wouldn't make up for the loss of cash over the last year and a few months. And you always want to have a bit of a reserve in that fund for things that happen like this.
Well, Maurice, what were those 520, whatever you were down, that took us near the red, or you projected we were going to be in the red? What was that caused by? Labor? Was it actual food purchases that we bought that we were going to have to throw the food out? What was the makeup that caused the loss?
So you have a fixed cost with your labor. There's a degree when you reduce the amount of service that you're providing, you can shrink your labor a little bit, but not much because you're still servicing all the schools. You're still running a remote learning, when the kids were in hybrid, when the students were in hybrid. So you have to offer those lunches to those students to be able to do a drive-through. So you're still running an operation that has expense, and you're only getting reimbursed for meals served. So the federal government reimburses you on a per meal basis. So although our costs only went, and you're also paying for food, for the meals that you purchase. So although the cost of the food that we were purchasing went down slightly, the labor cost went down slightly, but our revenue dropped significantly because students weren't uptaking the meals because they weren't in front of us getting fed by us in school. So that caused a significant reduction in our revenue.
Right. So if we did not have to support that program for the $525,000, you would have been able to return that $525,000 plus the $315 to the town of Fairfield?
It would have been one of the options to the board on the table.
What would have been the other option? To spend it?
Yes. I mean, we're obligated to spend, our funds as they're appropriated for education purposes. And so, yes, we would have looked to spend our full budget appropriately. Correct.
Were you like somehow like reserving these funds for the whole year, like during the 4 quarters? to put
No,
towards that, to support that program?
No, if you look at, so I mean, I came in August, but I did review all the financials. So if you look at the quarterly statements, no, that wasn't part of our accounting. That came up as we saw things change around Q3 and Q4. If you remember in Q1 and Q2, we were projecting pretty major deficits. That changed slightly as the picture became more clear throughout the year.
So it was only at the end of the year that you realized that you had these extra funds, the $525,000.
I believe so.
Able
I
to
can
put
check.
towards that?
Yeah, I apologize because that did predate me, but I do believe I'm not sure when it came up in conversation, Mr. Walsh, but I can certainly find that out for you because that would be an important piece of information for you to know. But I don't have that information right now.
If I could just add very quickly, I recall this issue being brought up by Ms. Laborious' predecessor, Doreen Munsell, in a Board of Education Finance and Budget Committee meeting back in April. So this was something that the board was aware of as we were coming near the end of the year. We did not have a firm figure on how much we might need and how much might be available for that transfer, but that possibility was brought before the board at that time.
And I
Jeff?
reiterate, and I can find out a little bit more, but we were not unique in that many school districts did find themselves in this position in this unique time.
Of your colleagues in other towns, how did the ones that didn't need to do this, how did they handle it? Because they seem like the people who are on top of their stuff because they were somehow able to get around this, even during COVID.
Yeah, I can find out. I mean,
and not have these losses.
Yeah, I can certainly check in on that, Mr. Walsh.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, my next question is in regards to the non-lapsing account. So I just want to confirm, I think Ms. Laborious, you said it, but I also see it on the link. So there is not 1 penny left in the non-lapsing account, correct?
Correct.
So for all intents and purposes, this non-lapsing account, for the purpose it was set up, is over.
That's correct. Yes.
Then, Mr. Cummings, we don't really get you here a lot, so it's kind of, I guess, tied to, I'll try to tie it to finances, but as you've now started the year, now here in October, where do we stand with testing our children to see where they stand educationally compared to where they should be because of COVID? Like if COVID wasn't supposed to happen, have you tested the children and are you fully confident to be able to address that? And are we behind? Are our children behind in their learning of where they should be for the ages that they are?
If it depends, excuse me, Mr. Walsh, on the STAR assessment, which we give to students in K-8 and to some of the students in high school, only a few. We do that assessment in September. We're looking at those results. Those are kind of the baseline for the beginning of the year. And parenthetically, there will be a full report to the board at their October 26th meeting on this data as well as our SBA scores and other data sources. I would say right now that we expect on that type of measure that students in general are behind. I think in general, what we're seeing is a greater concerns around math instruction and than in reading. But we are concerned about that. So you'll see that at the elementary level, we're developing, we have a strong SRBI process in place already to identify those students to provide additional supports. And within a few weeks, we're going to be starting a process, an afternoon program in the middle schools and high schools to address those students and their learning needs. That'll be 2 hours after school for students who are behind as well. So we're in the process of identifying students for those that middle school and high school program right now.
Are putting these programs into place and things like that. Does that mean it's going to have a negative impact on your budget?
No, Mr. Walsh, we're using for the secondary, the elementary program is essentially contained within our budget as is. That's the staffing for library, our language arts specialists, our math specialists at the elementary level. But at the secondary level, that funding for that program will be one of the components of our ARP-ESSER grant.
Mr. Mancusi, I mean, or Mr. Cummings, I'm not trying to bypass you, but I want to ask about in the special education program, what he's similarly seen and whether it's
Sure.
going to have a negative impact on that budget.
What I could say is we're looking at our spending for Q1 right now. The state has, we have gotten a supplemental ARP money related to IDEA grant that is to be used for services provided to students with disabilities. We've been awarded almost $547,000 that we're applying for right now to address learning needs and programming needs of students as a result of COVID.
Mr. Mancusi, are you seeing the special education students as a whole, any individual, but as a whole, you find them to be further behind than they should be at this point?
In some cases, yes. In some cases, no. But I do find that the overall needs of students has increased.
Is that going to put pressure on your budget?
Yes.
Great amount of pressure, like you were going to be seeing deficits versus budget?
Potentially, yes.
When will we have a handle on that? Like,
we're working on that right now. We're going to be doing Ms. Laborious and I are meeting in the next couple weeks to go over all our expenses. So we have
the funding that you're getting from the federal government is going to be enough to make that up, or do you think that there's going to be further stress in addition to the extra money you're getting?
I really can't answer that right now. Between our regular IDEA grant, our Medicaid reimbursement, our ARP IDEA grant, and any other revenues that we have, hoping it makes up all the deficits. But at this time, I can't say it will or not.
Mr. Cummings, Ms. Laborious, with all these different grants and things you're getting, which are all great, especially with the needs of the students, do you see these creating cliffs for you as you come to next year's budget?
Well, I can speak to ARP-ESSER at this point. The IDA ESSER that Mr. Mancusi spoke about is Rob, if I'm wrong, just interrupt me, but I believe that right now is only a single year projection.
Yes.
The ARP-ESSER is a 3-year, Mr. Walsh. So as we put the funding into ARP-ESSER for this middle school, high school program, we funded it out in the grant application for the next 3 years. So at that level, I think we have sustainability for, as I said, the elementary programs in the existing budget. The secondary program will be an ARP-ESSER for the next 3 years. And I should mention as well that as we think about what that secondary program can do, students who are identified as special education but have learning needs that fit within this program, they're also able to participate in that program. So this is another service we can offer those students as well.
And if I could just, the ARP IDEA grant is a one-time grant, but we have 2 years to use the money.
Thank you, Mr. Mancusi. Thank you, Mr. Cummings. That's all I have, Mr. Brown. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. So perhaps in our first quarterly meeting on the 16th, there'll be some clear answers to the direction where we're headed. We know a lot can happen, all right, from November to June 30th, but at least we'll know where we stand throughout the first quarter. Okay. Thank you very much. Any further questions for the Board of Ed? The financial position. There is a document with the COVID non-lapsing statement that details the expenditures, COVID. Just want to make sure there's no questions there.
And
called COVID non-lapsing statement of account detailed by program. Okay, so then seeing no further questions, I would like to say that as far as we have a voting item tonight with encumbrances, and I think Schedule D covers the Board of Ed. So although we're going to move to the town, Mr. Boris, you may want to stay, maybe Mr. Cummings, just in case we have questions before we vote on that. Last year, we let everybody go, and then there were some questions on that item. So don't want to make the same mistake this year.
Okay, happy to stay.
We'll be here.
Okay, thank you. So with that said, we will go to item number 5. To review the town fiscal year 21 year-end financial position. So we have our CFO of the town, Mr. Smith, and we have our controller, Ms. Bossi. We also have our first select woman, and the town attorney will be with us in case we have any questions as we review the surplus and expenses and allocation. So Ms. Bossi, see you up there behind the podium. Good to have you. I'm sure you're glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to start off with the summary that I normally start off with, the projected net estimated operational variances. As you can see, we have actually more than 4 quarters on there because we did kind of an interim one as of March 25th. So, and just comparing Q3 to Q4, because we've kind of done all the others, we're more favorable, obviously. If you look at the bottom line, our estimated increase to fund balance went from approximately $5 million to a little over $9 million. The biggest driver of that, as you could tell, is our taxes. Our taxes went through the roof this year. Both current, prior, and interest are all a lot higher. Actually, our collection rate went above 99 for the first time in, I think, 15 or 20 years, according to our tax collector. So that accounted for $4.5 million. So in essence, half of our expected surplus, the 9, is due to the increase in current, prior, and interest taxes. So that's great news, and that's probably directly related to conveyance being through the roof, right? Conveyance and recording fees are over $2 million as well. So I kind of see those going kind of hand in hand. Obviously, when you sell a house, you need to bring all your taxes up to date. So those 2 items alone are, over $6.5 million of this surplus. So those really account for most of it. A lot of the other line items, there's slight variances from Q3 to Q4, starting at the top and just kind of going down. We spoke about the top line, the investment income. Again, we've known it's not going to be favorable due to really low interest rates. We ended the year at about the negative 1.3, which is where we thought we were going to be as of Q3. Conveyance and recording, again, we knew we were going to be over budget, but from Q3 to Q4, the projection went up, another $850,000. So that was great news. Building permits. We had talked about that for a few quarters, actually, last fiscal year. And we thought it was going to be flat, and then we thought maybe a little bit unfavorable. But we ended the year just about, on budget, $100,000 over. So that was actually fairly good news as well. The ECC, again, we knew the center wasn't open, so that's remained constant all year. Park and Rec revenue actually went up a little over $500,000. In essence, due to beach stickers, clearly the golf course, as we've been talking about all year as well, and beach parking are the main drivers in that variance from Q3 to Q4. So our Park and Rec really came in about $1.5 million over budget. Fire marshal fees, again, we've been talking about those all year. We ended the year slightly under budget at the 129, which we kind of knew about in Q3. So again, kind of the building permits and the fire marshal fees kind of go hand in hand. Some bigger projects still in the pipeline to come in next fiscal year. State revenue, slightly a little bit more unfavorable than we thought. Slight variance on our $5 million budget of negative, $99,000. State revenue, clearly this line has been new these last couple of years due to COVID. We have received $770,000 between CRF and the federal COVID relief. So that's 770, and other slight favorable variance of 81. And you can kind of look at the other ones in the revenue detailed reports. Small variances up and down in a lot of other smaller revenue lines, and you can see those in the detail. So the revenue really makes up for like about 6.4 million of our surplus. So again, really due to taxes and conveyance was really the drivers. Anyone have any questions on the revenue piece?
So we're going to
I
come
think
back
we
to we're going to come back to, just want to say, Ms. Bossi, to revenue. We can ask our questions, but
okay.
Obviously it's $6.4 million. It's a lot more than we're used to, due to the reasons Ms. Bossi said. So we have a discussion here that needs to be had, and we're going to come back to that after we look at our expense, to that particular discussion on whether options and process, okay, and how, you know, what our board's obligations are and our authority, as well as other boards, when it comes to the surplus and revenue. So we will revisit that. But before we go to expenses, are there any questions on any of the line items for revenue? Ms. Charlton?
Thank you, Mr. Brown. And Ms. Bossi, thank you. I guess first I should say I remember when we did this budget, and a couple of us, at least me, I was really nervous about that collection rate on the property taxes, and I've never been so happy to be so wrong. It's good to see that we had a very strong collection rate in this environment. I guess, and I don't have the budget book in front of me, and it's sort of hard to tell just based on the variances, but for some of these other line items, like Parks and Recreation revenue in particular, where we're $1.5 million to the positive, is that substantially better than prior years? Not the variance, just the revenue, or did we budget conservatively and that's why we have this variance, or is that revenue in the aggregate a lot higher than prior years?
I think it's been a lot higher, and really it's the driver is golf, really due to COVID. I think it's really the main driver, and you know, the beaches were, you know, up and down, right? It was closed to non-residents, it was opened up, so that went back and forth. But again, due to COVID, I think at the end of the day, the beach stickers really, it was a COVID activity that people felt comfortable going to the beach. So I think those two drivers really, and I think, Jared, we could look at the budget for 22. I honestly think that those actuals are higher than they've been historically due to COVID. And I can, if you look at the budget book here, if you have it,
I gotta get to the munis.
we can see what the budget for 22 looks like for those as well. He's pulling that up now.
Okay, just okay, that's helpful. And then on some of these items, and I'm thinking about beach parking in particular, did we move? I mean, did anything change there? I seem to recall that we started taking credit cards. I'm not sure when that happened. Was there anything that changed there that might have contributed to this?
I believe they increased the out-of-town fee.
Okay.
And I don't remember what it went from and to, but they did increase to kind of due to COVID, I think there was some overcrowding issues. They actually restricted clearly the out-of-towners for a while, but I do believe that they increased the out-of-town daily parking fee. I don't remember what it went from and to, but I think that was a driver. That was a change in the structure.
Okay, and that maybe that wasn't budgeted for, and the move. Am I thinking correctly that we moved from cash to credit card for those parking fees?
I believe they do take credit cards now. Yes. Yep.
Okay, but is it only credit cards or do we still take cash?
I'm not sure. Do you know, Brenda? I'm not sure.
Okay. Yeah, just
I could
interesting.
find out.
Obviously, when you're handling cash for things like parking, You know, there's always
Yeah.
some risk associated with that. So that would be interesting to know. But yeah, that's all I had overall. You know, obviously good news. And yeah, when you know about the, you know, the comment I made on the schedule of the school expenses going forward, maybe something to think about. It would actually be helpful to see the budget in here so we could see, you know, a budget column so we could kind of see what these numbers are relative to. Some of these may be, you know, very small differences in the scheme of things. I know it's on the backup, but just
Yeah, it's on the backup. Yeah.
Yeah, suggest it for the future.
Ms. Charlton, this is Jared. I can give you a sense on the, you know, Caitlin mentioned the golf fees, just greens fees. So we had budgeted the 3-year average, which was just over $1 million, is $1,047,000, and the final year end was $1,576,000, so it was up about 50%. That's at Smith, just at Smith.
Okay, so a third of that variance was just that one course. Okay.
Right.
All right, that's helpful.
Just give you a
Thank
sense.
you.
Would be interesting to see the reason for that. Maybe it's because of the investment we made into it. You know, we made a $7 million investment, or people aren't traveling much because of COVID, so they're golfing more here. Well, I guess it's something we'll see as the years move forward. Mr. DeWitt?
Yeah, just to you know, add on to Ms. Charlton's comment. Her first question was, you know, in the 2021 budget, which I'm looking at too, you know, we took H. Smith Richardson golf fees down a little over 3.5%, right? Thinking that we were going to continue, you know, in this manner. It's clearly up like 50%, right? We also took Carl Dickman fees down like 5.5%. So I think the answer to your original question, Ms. Charlton, was in this fiscal year, we did reduce the greens fees and those kind of fees in the budget, and then we had a stellar year, so it may be a bit of a compound effect overall.
All right, thank you, Mr. DeWitt. Any further questions on specific line items to revenue? Okay, I'm seeing none, so let's go to expenses. Caitlin.
Okay, on the expense side, I'm just going to kind of summarize a little bit. It's almost a favorable $3 million. We thought we were going to be at a favorable 2.4. So really the variances between Q3 and Q4 are not as large as on the revenue side. Starting at the top, vacancies, you know, again, we're close to the million, ended up at 811 as we start to backfill some of the vacancies. Part-time, we were pretty close. We have about a $500,000 savings there due to COVID, you know, largely, or 100% really. Park and rec revenue, again, on the flip side of the revenue, a slight overage in expenses due to, again, the same types of things. People down at the beach keeping out the non-residents was really the big one, and some part-time help needed at the golf course due to the increased usage. Crossing guards, specials, slightly over, again, due to the hybrid schedule. We talked about that at Q3 at the school, so there's an increased need for crossing guards more than the normal amount of times due to the hybrid schedule. ECC, the actual came in at a favorable 992. Again, the center was not open, so that corresponds to the revenue piece as well. Solid waste and recycling, we talked about this $38,000 all year. That happened back in Q1 due to some overtime costs due to the compactors. And the other came slightly more favorable from our projection in Q3 of 406 to like a 659. And again, a lot of smaller accounts kind of making up for that, as you can see on the back up to the sheet. Some of which, you know, almost 100,000 of that is actually relating to vacancies as well. So the contribution for 401k not needed, and the lower life insurance. So that was 100 of that 659. Again, if you went through the detail, our unemployment costs were actually under budget due to the federal aid. So they were giving us almost 50% on our COVID-related unemployment costs. So slightly favorable on a lot of the smaller other accounts, and again, they're kind of listed out in the expense report. Jumping down a little bit to the non-operational piece was the non-public transportation, which we've known about since March 25th. That came in at a favorable 734. I think Courtney spoke to the savings on the public side as well during the Board of Ed presentation. And offset slightly by some negative costs for the storm and COVID, which then gave us a positive almost $3 million variance on the expense side, which if you add it to the favorable $6 million, we're about at a 9.3 or so expected surplus for fiscal 21.
Okay, any questions on specific items for expenses? Ms. Charlton?
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Ms. Bossy, for the storm costs, the $360,000, are we eligible for any reimbursement for those costs?
Yeah, about 103 of that 770 up top was for Storm Isaias.
Okay.
And we're still working on, that's not done yet. Connie's still going back and forth with the feds, so we could be getting some more money, but we just do not have a firm number yet. So I didn't want to accrue anything until we actually have it in hand.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Charlton. Mr. DeWitt?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Chris DeWitt. Maybe a little off topic, but with the ECC, when we talk about, the ECC, savings in revenue and, or loss in revenue and, uptick in expenses, how close are we to the ECC not being on this list next year as a give and take of revenue and expenses? Are we close to that closing out?
I believe we're anticipating an opening in November.
Yeah.
In November.
Great. So within this fiscal year, we'll be reconciling that whole ECC account back to what it should be. That's great. Thank you.
Yep.
So probably first fiscal quarter, we're probably still going to be dealing with it, but after that, potentially.
Yeah, we could maybe have a little bit of, well, depending on the revenue expected and the expenses that we incurred, there could be some variances, yes.
Got it. All right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. DeWitt. Any questions on the line items for expenses? So now the expenses, we have a surplus of almost $3 million, and this board can take action on this tonight, unlike on the revenue surplus. So we would do that if we were going to when we get to transfers, correct, Ms. Bossy?
Yes. So we have encumbrances and transfers that kind of are directly related to these expenses. Yep. Okay, and revenue.
So we should go to encumbrances first and then come back to expenses.
Yep, that will tie into the proposed transfers, yeah.
Okay, so let's go to item number 6, right? Assuming there's no questions on the grant schedule of estimated state revenue for this board, there's one other document. It's really not much of a difference between what the budget was and what the state final difference of $99,000, but I do just want to reference that. So, Ms. Bossy, ready for us to go to item number 6, and I'll put it before us?
Yes.
Okay, to hear, consider, and act upon a request from the Chief Fiscal Officer to approve schedules A, B, C, D, and E, carrying over funds for encumbrances and reappropriations as of June 30th, 2021, as supported by purchase orders or letters of request by department heads or the Chief Fiscal Officer. Can I have a motion to put this before us, please, Mr. DeWitt? And I have it seconded by Ms. Charlton. So this item is now before us, and Ms. Bossy, turn it back over to you.
Okay. Schedule. So this is a schedule. These schedules you've seen in the past. Schedule A, B. We'll do A and B together. These are open POs. that were requested to be carried forward from 21 into 22. There's a vendor, there's an amount. It's for goods and or services that were not able to be received prior to June 30. So even if they were received in July, I make them not expend it, and we carry forward the PO upon your request, and then we'll increase the budget. What it does is it increases the budget in 22, and then it's paid out of 22, even though it's expensed in 21. So all of these numbers, just to let you know, all the numbers on the transfer, on all the schedules, are already embedded in the surplus of 9.4. So just kind of keep that in mind. So there's a listing of open POs that corresponds to Schedule A, B, and I don't want to skip C for a second, but D being on the Board of Ed side. The listing is for Schedule A, slightly higher than I'd say last year. Last year it might have been around 300,000, mainly due to a lot of materials not being able to be procured timely. So there is a list by department on what it really makes it up. The Public Works Operations being the largest, and again, the listing is there. There's some vehicles that were on order and were just not able to be received, and there's some building, maintenance repair building POs that were not able to be done. They have bids, they have quotes, they have for painting. So all of these they've been vetted through the whole purchasing process. So these are valid POs that are requested to be carried forward. So that's the 575. On the water pollution side, again, same list. 6,604. Again, a few open POs carried forward. On their side, small dollar amounts. Schedule B is in effect the same as Schedule A, but there are POs that have been carried over for more than 1 year. So they get treated slightly differently in our annual report. So Harbor Management has a small PO, and Water Pollution had a couple of POs for 14,000. Again, all on the list, on the munis list, so you can see how those kind of add up. If anyone has any questions, I'll move on to the reappropriations, which is Schedule C. The only difference between A and B and C is C that there's not a PO in the system. So it's a request, again, for funds to be carried forward, but not a purchase order that's gone through the purchasing process. So there's no vendor per se that's been assigned to these. So these are slightly different. Again, the same accounting method, but just slightly different for the process. So if we look at Schedule C, there's a few more than usual on here this year. And again, a lot of it's due to either a reorg or not able to procuring the goods or services. Conservation, and I have a listing of emails behind the open PO list from the department heads requesting these reappropriations, and they give a little bit of detail about what each is for. Conservation is requesting $50,000 to update their existing town wetlands map. Again, this was kind of found out about during the whole conservation reorg. And our new director wrote a few sentences as to why this needed to be done. And as you could tell, the last one was done in 2008. So it was a proposal from the firm who had been helping out down in conservation as well. It was their recommendation to update these maps. So that's the $50,000 for conservation. I'm going to skip legal services just for a second because Jared's going to jump in there. Human resources is the $75,000 for the time and attendance system that we talked about last year. I believe the RFP is just about done, but I don't think that they're there yet in terms of getting a vendor or a PO in the system. So Mr. Hazelkamp has a memo asking for those funds to be reappropriated as well. There's a $300,000 request from Mr. Marsilio regarding the road maintenance of paved roads due to unanticipated and unavoidable delays. They weren't able to do some potholes and road maintenance, so they're requesting $300,000, which they have in their budget. It was unexpended in that line item. Library Main and Woods are requesting $55,000 and $35,000 respectively. There's an email in here from Jan Fisher, who is the acting town librarian, wanting to carry forward for some part-time hours for both Main and Woods at the library to increase their hours from, I believe, 48 to about 60 hours per week at each location. And again, they have, I believe, they've left a couple $100,000 in their part-time line, both of them due to the library being closed this last fiscal year. And the Park and Rec one is one that you guys are familiar with, that just in May, you guys approved the master plan to be completed for Park and Rec for the 150. So he just was not able to expend the money yet. So he just asked for that clearly to be carried forward, because I believe it was in your May meeting that that request was approved. Jared, do you want to talk to the 200?
Yeah,
legal?
want me to talk about legal?
Sure.
So in the legal line, there are a few different buckets of that we broke this into. One is kind of a general amount for legal services, which was, we estimate to be about $25,000. Last year's was about $22,000. Litigation, which is mostly the town attorney and his firm, was at $320 last year. We're thinking it's going to be around the same, about $325. There are a couple of other places where costs are going to subside and essentially go away. One being in the area of conservation, where we used some legal services during the transition of leadership there. And then solar tax appeals, those have all been settled. So those costs will essentially basically stay where they are at current day levels. So the three areas where we're probably going to see some increases are tax appeals. Based on the burn rate so far this year and toward the end of last year, we're expecting those to be higher, and estimating it to be about $324,000 for this year. Labor, we have a number of unsettled contracts, and we are using an outside firm to help negotiate those contracts. So that will cost more. And then finally, there is going to be an additional need for legal costs related to the Charter Review Commission of approximately $75,000.
Okay, does that cover C, Schedule C?
Yes.
So before
so now we're on, oh, go ahead.
Just before we go to D, I just want to see if there's any questions on the reappropriations. Ms. Charlton?
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Yes, I have a question on the paving. So we, I think, budgeted $1 million, and then we said we would bond another $1 million. So is this 300,000? Does this mean we spent 700,000 on paving, and this 300,000 is the remainder to equal the operational budget? Or just help me understand how that relates to what we budgeted and what we did.
Okay, so this is not the paving line item, that's a separate line item. This is maintenance of improved roads. It's a separate line item in the DPW budget. So it's for potholes, it's for more maintenance, it's not paving per se.
Okay.
It's more the fixing, it's more the smaller maintenance of the roads, and there was about 300 left. So he wishes to carry that forward to spend it next year.
I see. Okay. Thank you for clarifying.
Thank you, Ms. Charlton. Mr. Mottola?
Thanks. Back on the same issue, can you be a little more specific as to what were the unanticipated and unavoidable delays that prevented the town from doing this work in the maintenance of these roads?
I can ask Mr. Marsilio, but I'm assuming it's kind of due to the reorg, and having the different people down at the garage, but I can find out. I'm not sure if it was a material issue or
Okay.
or what.
Yeah, if you find out, let us know. That'd be great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Yep.
Mr. McCullough. Ms. Marmion?
Thank you. Can you just, you mentioned under legal services that there was an expense for charter review. Is that having the town attorney kind of participate in the charter review and give perspective? I'm just not sure what the legal expenses relate to.
Jim?
Mr. Baldwin?
Yes, hi, I'm here. Sorry about that. We retain the services of attorney Steve Mednick to kind of guide the Charter Review Commission along. He is an expert in the field and has done many charter revisions for numerous municipalities. And so that is the anticipated fees that are going to be paid to him in the process.
Okay, so the Charter Review Commission he'll be at meetings, or they'll refer to him for expertise? Is that basically the way it works?
He will be attending every meeting, and he will be really be the one guiding the commission with his expertise and experience through the process. And that process, as you know, is well underway. And he began that with the administration, several months ago, quite frankly, preparing for this, for the creation of the commission.
I see. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Thank you, Ms. Marmion. Thank you, Mr. Baldwin. Any further questions on Schedule C? I'm seeing none. So let's go to Schedule D. So, who's going to be, Ms. Barbares, are you going to take this one?
Sure. So the Fairfield Public Schools has outstanding encumbrances of about $2.8 million. That represents about 1.5% of our overall budget. I'm going to go to an average that happens with school districts at year end, and then I can talk through why I'm speaking about that. But on average, districts end with about 2.29% of their, at least in current years, this year and last year, on average, of open encumbrances when they close the fiscal year, about 1.95% for median. So we're in line with what would be expected for a school district to close with open encumbrances, open purchase orders. For us, of that 2.8 million, about $587,000 is related to tuition agreements that were legally mandated to pay. Those agreements were made for this fiscal year. In that case, a tuition has to be paid, and then we have to reimburse. So we have to receive receipts for that request. Of that so this report that you have was as of 8/2, which is our close. So as of current, which actually 9/24, so a week ago or so, about half of those bills have been paid, have been received and been paid, and some of them are still outstanding. The bulk of the purchase open encumbrances that you'll see is related to maintenance and facilities, which is in line with what Miss Bossi was reporting earlier about delays in receiving materials. But also, we had spoken earlier about needing to hold off till year end to complete our planned projects. So of those encumbrances, about 800,000 are related to planned projects that were approved by the Board of Ed in town for roofing, paving, painting, engineering, windows. That's about $800,000 of that $1.8 million. In addition, there's about $50,000 of open encumbrances related to desks and materials that were already ordered, but have not yet been received because of delays in the supply chain. But it's with a partner that we work with regularly, Demco. and we're certain that they'll be delivered. Also there's a lot of the services were rendered, but we're waiting for, like I said, for invoices to come in. So of that 2.8 million, it's now down to about $1 million of outstanding items or open encumbrances now that we're at the early part of October. And so I'll pause there and see if you have any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Laborious. Mr. Walsh.
Thank you for that summary, Ms. Laborious, and thanks for the statistics on where those numbers are around the state. Have you looked what our numbers have normally been for those encumbrances for, say, like the last 10 years?
Yes, actually, my predecessor, Ms. Menzel, kept a report for that, and this year is a little bit lower. I think because she was leaving, she was very careful about getting bills paid out before she left. But yes, so on average over the last 10 years, it was hovered around 2%. And in absolute dollars, we're a little bit higher in absolute dollars, but as a percentage of the total budget, we're a little bit lower than our average.
So are you saying that that number's gonna keep going up because our budgets keep increasing?
Yeah, well, the percentage should stay low, but the absolute dollars would go up a little bit. So last year, I think it was 2.5 million. This year is about 2.7. And I believe, I don't have it in front of me, but this year it was 1.5%. Last year, I think it was like 1.7% or so. So the relative percent went down. I think my goal would be to work with the team this year to make sure that, you know, we're being transparent and clear at year end so that we know exactly where we stand and that we're able to close out invoices so we don't have to ask to carry over, except in the case where it's exceptions, like, for example, the tuition, and I can explain that to you clearly, and the maintenance projects, which I can explain with Angelus and with Mr. Papa George and my colleagues to the board clearly. You know, there's little things like, for example, this year, because of the spending freeze, sports items that were budgeted for were purchased in June, and we're just waiting for the invoices to get paid, to be honest, and the goods in some cases to be received.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Walsh.
Thank you.
Any further questions on Schedule D? Okay, I'm seeing none. So we are ready to vote on this item, this motion before us. Is item number 6. Motion is before us. So we'll take a vote. All those in favor of the motion, say aye. Okay, that is, any opposed? It's unanimous in favor. Okay, thank you. So we're going to go to item number 7, and we're going to make sure, do we need the Board of Ed for item number 7, Ms. Bassi? We need someone from the town behind the podium. In the meantime, I'll put the motion before us. To hear, consider, and act upon a request from the Chief Fiscal Officer to approve transfers as of June 30th, 2021. And I have a motion, Mr. DeWitt, second by Mr. Walsh. Okay, so item number 7 is before us. For the Board of Ed, let's take transfers. This is just for the town, so I don't think this concerns you, so I believe you are done. So thank you for being here tonight. You're welcome to stay.
Thank you, Mr. Brown.
Surprise question or comment comes up, but otherwise, you're done for tonight. But thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're on item number 7 with transfers. Okay, so still covering expenses, transfers for operational activity. Who is going to lead us through this? Is that you, Ms. Kupchak?
are we talking about, this is your turn? Well, it's really. Oh, okay. So, there's two pieces to the transfers, as we kind of mentioned. There's operational activity, which if you have your funds transfer sheet, we can kind of go over the top box.
Yes, let's do that.
Okay. So let's look at the top box first. I think that'll, and then Brenda could kind of join in for the bottom box, so to speak. So the top box is transfers that are needed to make some of these departments whole. Okay, so the departments kind of on the right-hand side where it says 2, it says conservation, legal, HR, fire, those need that amount of money to make them whole. On the other side, on the left-hand side, is the departments that have excess of surplus on the expense side to make them whole. So for example, so if we look at conservation, which is like the 4th or 5th one down, so knowing that they have a request for $50,000 for the map, they need the $32,783 to make them whole. So they were the difference of $18,000 under budget, but with this $50,000 request, it put them over budget by the 32. So and a lot of these departments are ones that we've kind of talked about a little bit through the quarterly reports throughout the year. But we can go kind of one by one if you want. Legal, the $160,000, again, directly related to the $200,000 request for reappropriations. So they were 40,000 under. So in order for that, the 200,000 to be carried forward into fiscal 22, they would need an additional 160 to get them there because those appropriations get expensed in fiscal 21. HR, and you can see some on the expense side where the Human Resource Department went over, right? It went over due to the heart and hypertension claim, which was on the detailed report as well. So they need the 183 to make them whole. Fire Department 199, hydrant and water services the 40. So you can kind of go down the line. We've talked about some of these. A lot of the park and rec ones are the overage on the expense side due to the, again, increased golf play and the attendance down at the beach to cover their the part-time costs due to the increase in revenue. Debt service, it was over by $54,000, mainly due to increased costs for Pullman Conley throughout the year. There's been a lot of kind of more complicated bond authorization questions that have come up. And thinking about it, the hardening project had 3 or 4 different authorizations. We had to go back, figure out what exactly was needed to kind of clean up the authorizations and the additional appropriations needed. The $2 million for the Parkview for Mark Barnhart's purchasing of the Quincy streets and how that would all work with the Affordable Housing Trust Fund and possibly not needing to bond it because possibly in a few years we'd be getting revenue from a developer to offset it. So just costs like that slightly made our debt service fees and professional line go over. The last one being the COVID, the 218 that was on the top summary sheet. So what we had to do for the COVID expenses was separate them out into a separate expense line, A, due to ease of reporting for the state and the feds, and B, so that it wouldn't kind of skew our actuals for those departments. So for example, if a department had a lot of PPE costs in fiscal 20 and 21, we wouldn't want to look at a 3-year average and say, oh, you know, that was part of our normal course of history. So we moved those COVID costs out of the department. So we created a COVID expense line to move those to. So we need the 218 to cover those COVID expenses. Again, all of these are embedded on the summary sheet. So they're all in the 9.3 surplus. So this is budgeting transfers to make some of these departments whole again. And again, coming from on the left-hand side, some of the favorable expense lines, like we talked about, the private school bus transportation has favorability, and the libraries had favorability in the part-time. The health had favorability in the temporary payroll line, I think, on the detailed report. And DPW still, even after their request for reappropriation and the PO carry forward, had some favorability on their side. So these are, again, budget transfers for operational activity only to make these departments whole. So we kind of do these every year, but go ahead, sorry.
Yep, thank you, Ms. Bonsi. Mr. Wall.
I see Chief McCarthy's on the phone. Can you explain why you have a $200,000 variance in your account? Is this all overtime?
Good evening, Mr. Walsh and members of the Board of Finance. So there were on, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you for being here, Chief.
Yep, there were, in fiscal year 21, the department had a number of significant challenges. Some were related to COVID. We had a number of quarantines that were required for our members that were exposed either at work or at home. And in some cases that included whole stations, shifts at stations. And those quarantines, when they did occur, were up to 10 days in length for every member of that crew. We did have a number of emergencies over the course of the year, storm events that required us to respond and upstaff. And probably one of the more concerning was we had projected 2 retirements in the fiscal year, and we had 5. Those additional 3 were not accounted for recruit training. As you know, we send recruits to the academy. While they're at the academy, their positions need to be filled on the line. So those were not projected. And in sick and injury in particular, we were carrying several long-term injuries that we're working to resolve through HR and the pension board ultimately. And when we put the budget together, obviously it was pre-COVID. We anticipated that those positions would be resolved and ultimately retired. They dragged on well into the fiscal year. So those were drags on our injury leave. And we had a number of employees that had non-line of duty illnesses, some significant orthopedic injuries that were sustained off duty, hernias and other medical conditions that caused long outages in their sick leave or in the sick leave, and challenged us and drove up that number much higher than what we had budgeted for.
Yeah, Chief, I think as we go quarter to quarter, I think we better get from you a better understanding. And so it's on our minds more as opposed to it kind of showing up as a surprise. So I think for each quarter, I think you should be prepared to talk about your overtime line. I don't know why this doesn't happen with the police. I don't. This has happened for years this way. But I'd like you to be prepared for future quarters, starting with Q1, and just update us each quarter on your overtime line.
Yep, understood.
So that we have it fully on our minds, exactly what's going on in real time.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. And we'll have it on our variance report too. We could just refer to it, see where we're at on all those. Okay, thank you, Chief. Any further questions for the Chief, Mr. DeWitt?
No, not for the chief. No, sorry.
Okay, just one. So any further questions for the Chief? Because if not, we'll let the Chief go.
All right. Good night. Thank you.
No? All right, thank you, Chief. Mr. DeWitt.
Thank you. Just a procedural question. Procedural question to maybe to Caitlin. Shouldn't we have done the transfers before we voted on the schedule? Because we've literally in our schedule transferred or moved $200,000 of the legal budget to the next fiscal year, when in reality right now there's only $40,000 there, right?
Yeah. So maybe the agenda was out of order, I guess. Yeah.
Okay. So just so we're all aware, the schedules we just voted on 10 minutes ago are predicated on us making these transfers, or they don't work anymore, right?
We need these transfers, yeah.
Right, okay.
Or we need to reopen item number 6. Okay, good point.
If we don't vote on these transfers, we would have to reopen 6.
Well,
That's right.
that's a lot of pressure on us right now.
All right, thank you.
Well, it wouldn't affect every line, but it would affect some lines, yeah.
But in the first box, maybe, right? First box. Some items in that first box.
Some items in the first box, yes.
Okay. Any further questions? Ms. Charlton.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. I have something that the chief said sort of stuck out to me, and it was about, and I don't think this is just fire, it was about the impact of extended quarantines on overtime. And I imagine that impacted a number of different departments, even if it's not broken out. I just have to wonder, do we have any idea how much that impacted the town as a whole? I mean, I imagine that had an impact in the police department, certainly in the schools. Do we know what that looks like?
So, hold on, Brenda wants to say something.
So, Lori, was your question, do we have a lot of quarantines in town besides the police and fire department?
Yeah, I was just wondering if that was a driver of costs throughout the town, similar to what it was in the fire department, and if we know what that might have cost us during the year.
No, it's obvious that, obviously the fire department, they're more interactive with the community. They do lift assists. They go in and people's houses during emergency calls and things of that nature. So they have a lot more exposure than our regular town employees.
Okay, so you're saying we didn't have the same level of absences due to quarantines, and then the need to supplement that with overtime in other departments?
No.
Okay. All right.
And if I could just add to that, I would say almost every employee got a laptop from IT, so they were able to work from home as well.
Right.
Gotcha. Yeah. I mean, obviously that wouldn't work for police and fire, but for other positions, yeah. I get it. Yeah, it's something you don't really think about. I mean, I guess I've thought about it, but the economic impact of that, and how how our policies play in, and I have no idea where the town stands in terms of vaccinations of employees, et cetera, but doesn't sound like it was widespread. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Charlton. Any further questions?
Going back to Mr. DeWitt's point, there's three accounts going back to, we're kind of now married to these numbers because of the reappropriation. And it's only 3 departments. It's the conservation, the legal, and the HR, just to let you know. So 3 of them, which were the top ones on the right-hand side, the rest of them are operational and had nothing to do with the transfer or the reappropriation.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Bossy. Okay, if there aren't any further questions in that on the operational activity, we're going to move down to the second box, which is the fund transfer to Opeb fiscal year 21. I'll let Ms. Bossy talk to this. There's a second spreadsheet called Opeb history that refers to this. So now this is in regards to the expenses of the 2.9 million. And this here would be a voting item. And what we would be voting on is taking a portion of the 2.9 million, the 1.3 of it, 1.322, and moving it to OPEB to make up for the cuts that we made in the 2021 budget, right? 2021 budget due to COVID. And if you recall, we reduced funding to Opeb, and we made a lot of adjustments to get ourselves down to the lowest tax increase and mill rate increase possible. So at the fiscal 21 budget, the Opeb budget cut was 3.8 million. Then we transferred some funds into Opeb, as we said we would do as a sensitive body in fiscal year 20, and we still have a shortfall of 1.3 million. So I'm kind of giving an overall view of what we're looking at here as part of the transfer, but Ms. Bosky, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, I think you laid it out nicely, and that sheet kind of shows what's going on with the shortfall in the ADAC funding. So this was just a proposal I got asked to put together saying, okay, if we wanted to now fully get back to that 3.8, as we did kind of the 2.5 already, this 1.3 gets us back to the 3.8 cut. So what this is saying is, in essence, moving 544, which is the town piece, because as we know, OPEB's kind of split into two trusts, and the 778 to the police and fire. And again, the accounts on the left-hand side represent accounts with a surplus. So the 990, which we spoke about on the quarterly, is the savings on the expense side from the center not being open, and DPW had an additional 332 left. So we could use that surplus to fund the 1322 if it's so desired to move the 13 into OPEB. And again, like you said, this is strictly on the expense side. So this is just taking the budget expense money and moving it from one line to another.
So then 1.6 would drop to fund balance. So if we
out of the expense savings of 2.9, yeah.
Right, still coming up to 2.9. So what this does is two things. One, it covers OPEB and our history of doing what we had to do to cover our budget in 2020 and to ensure we brought the tax increase down to zero. So it makes up for that shortfall, and it puts funds back into surplus, which we did reduce last two budget seasons. So two long-term liabilities, the fund balance, and OPEB. Fund balance not really a liability, but it's something we're obligated to cover. We want to keep it, remember, between 10 and 15% currently. Ms. Bossi, is it around 11.05?
11.05 is where we ended up in fiscal 20, yeah.
Okay, and if we drop the 1.6 into the fund balance, what does that do to the percentage?
I believe it's 11.48. But again, I think now we have to kind of incorporate the other side of the equation, which is the revenue surplus as well.
Yeah, so that's kind of a separate topic, right, on the revenue surplus. Let's just finish this conversation. Are there any questions on the OPEB, on transferring the funds over to OPEB, Ms. Charlton? And then we'll go to surplus and get some input there from the town and the administration. Ms. Charlton, you have a question or comment?
I don't have a question. I just have a comment, and I'd just like to thank the administration for putting this proposal forth. I think I'm really pleased that we're able to do this. I don't think any of us were happy about cutting the ADEC when we did, and I'm very happy to support this, and I'm really glad that we are able to do it. So that's all I have to say.
Mr. Walsh.
I would also like to follow up on Ms. Charlton's comments. I had actually mentioned this to when we first started finding out about this number, that I called our chairman and I reminded him of our body's commitment that we wanted to restore those funds as soon as possible. And we took the unprecedented act of not funding the ADAC for OPEB in order to try to protect the town when basically the community was closed down during our budget season, and in order to try to save our taxpayers' money, not knowing where the economy was going. But I know, just like it's, we've talked about this a couple of times, we've transferred money in here before. I know all of us felt bad about that, and we made a commitment, and we're living by that commitment by restoring these funds. And I appreciate the administration backing us on that, and wanting to do it as well. And I know I will feel better that we continue to fund our long-term liabilities in that regard and fund that ADAC and get those funds back into those accounts. That's what I would say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. It does feel good to cover that cliff. Well, get that behind us. Mr. Mottola.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm all for this. I just have another question about the DPW. Why is there $332,000 in that account that wasn't used this year? Just, it seems like the DPW has a lot of money that they didn't use. Can anyone answer that question?
I could go through the line by line tomorrow if you want, and I could look at the larger variances and ask Mr. Marsilio and get some explanations.
You want to shoot us an email so we don't waste time tonight? I'm just curious about that. That's fine.
Okay.
But I'm in 100% agreement with what to do with this. I just wanted a little more clarity on that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Any further comments on the transfer? Okay. Any comments from the administration before we vote on the transfer? And this is, again, just on the expense side. No? Okay. Okay, this motion is before us. Looks like we're ready to vote. All those in favor of item number 7, please say aye. And I'm looking. Ms. Marmion, you're good? Okay. Mr. Claire? Okay, it is unanimous. In favor, there are no opposed. Okay, so we still have to work through the revenue side of the equation and the surplus of 6.3 million. Okay, and this is not as cut and dry for the Board of Finance, because there are other boards that are involved with this discussion and decision, and possibly voting on this too. And so we want to have a discussion on this. We're not going to vote on this tonight, right? We're not going to vote on this tonight. It's a discussion. We have Mr. Baldwin here. We have Ms. Kupchak here, who might want to talk to us about the revenue side of this equation and her thoughts. And then for policies and really procedures and protocol and how we work this through, we have Mr. Baldwin, our town attorney, with us too. So Ms. Kupchak, thank you, and turn it over to you for your thoughts on this.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, given the large surplus that you're looking at this year, I did ask Chairman Brown if I could provide an update to the board so that you could understand a little bit better about what's coming down the line. The town has identified over 50 sites within Fairfield as Julian sites, or where Julian fill was used for various projects. My administration has been working over the last 2 years to clean up the mess that was left behind and the additional notices of violations that were coming in my first few months in office. We all know there are major criminal cases pending against a number of former employees of the previous administration, and some of whom I terminated. Meanwhile, our town attorney continues to work on litigation efforts to recoup some of these losses against third parties. But to go back a little, it took almost a year to negotiate a consent order with DEEP. Once we had that, it had enabled us to start remediating many of the Julian sites. So I'm going to try to discuss this from like a 50,000-foot view the best way I can. I know that some of the cost ranges are going to be significant, but many of the estimates depend largely on future testing. So I did want the board to know that the filled pile remediation, the actual fill pile, and future use is currently in negotiation with DEEP, and current estimates of the cost to cap and close the site are looking to be in the range of between $4 and $8 million. They have to agree to the remedy And then we have to have a public hearing and so on and so forth. Number two, our largest issue is Penfield Pavilion. Under the building was one of the largest sites that this Julian fill was used, all of which is contaminated. We do not know yet the extent of the contamination contents until further testing is conducted beneath the building and in the parking lot. The cost to remove and dispose of the contaminated fill is looking to be in the areas based on our meetings and all the work between 2.5 and 5 million. Compounding the contamination problem the town faces, as early as April 2016, the previous administration also had advised that the pavilion be rebuilt in violation of a number of FEMA regulations. Rather than stop construction and correct those violations, the prior administration ignored and challenged FEMA while continuing that construction. The town we have hired outside consultants to argue the previous administration's position, but all of those arguments were found unpersuasive by FEMA, leading to the complete denial of a $4 million in grant that the town was awarded. Additionally, in light of the appeal denial, the town now has a building built in violation of a number of FEMA regulations, and the current administration, we are in negotiation with FEMA to consider how we can correct these violations. And the current estimates to correct them are looking to be anywhere between $5 and $8 million, depending on what we do with the building, which is going to be a long, drawn-out conversation that I want our community to be engaged in. Finally, there's Julian fill under the Penfield parking lot. Additional testing is required, but the current estimates are looking to be somewhere between $3 and $5 million. And then we have the remaining ancillary sites, which are still either under investigation or remediation, and they're currently estimated to cost between $3 to $4 million to effectively remediate those. So on the positive side, we have already completed remediation on 25 plus sites, and our LEP is in the process of filing the appropriate documents with the various regulatory agencies. Our remediation continues, and we will provide updates as appropriate. We expect to have a number of additional sites remediated by the end of the winter. But to date, we have spent $2.9 million between legal costs and remediation. It is my intention, though, to bring these items up to the Board of Selectmen at our next meeting and to ask for the transfer of this additional revenue surplus to be used toward what is looking to be an incredibly large bill that the town is going to have to pay. And so I just wanted to share that with all of you so you had sort of a heads up, because obviously this is a serious issue, and I will either open it up to questions or hand it back to the chairman.
All right, well, thank you, Ms. Kupchak. First of all, are there any questions for the first select woman right now? Mr. Walsh?
Brenda, just those numbers are a little overwhelming. I said you were reading them off category by category, but without having to do anything to the pavilion itself, what are the remediation costs? Do you have a total of what you think that would be just the remediation? You properly stated we're going to have a bigger conversation with what to do with Penfield, whether it's rebuilt, whatever is going to happen, and that's a separate question. But do you have some sense of what the total of the remediation is looking at when you added all those different categories up? And I'm sorry that if you don't, I'm asking you to do it. You don't have to do it right now if you don't have it.
So that's fine. So what these are obviously estimates, but we've been told that we should be looking at the remediation specifically under Penfield between 2.5 and 5 million. And then we are also looking at under the parking lot that could, the current estimates, they're suggesting that we should be looking at, obviously we have a lot more work to do, but we're looking at between 3 and 5 million under there. And then the actual pavilion, and you know, we've got, it's between 5 and 8 million. So there's going to be a couple of scenarios. One could be knock the whole thing down. That's actually cost something. Move the building and refix everything that's not FEMA compliant, which is actually a serious thing that's not easy to fix. You know, there's PCBs that are involved in this, so it's very expensive to remove. But we have been, like I said, repeatedly throughout this process, we have been doing monitoring around the building, air tests and all of that. We did from the very beginning and continue to ensure that there is no air contamination to anyone who goes anywhere near the outside of the building or in the building.
So I guess we'll get some more numbers on paper, maybe when you make this presentation to the Board of Selectmen.
Right, so, I mean, yes, you know, again, these are estimates. We've been working, you know, this entire fill pile situation has taken up an enormous amount of time. And I can't even begin to tell you the amount of meetings that my administration has to be in, the assistance from the environmental attorney, Mr. Miller, the LEPs, all of this. I mean, it's just, and then now the FEMA stuff too. So, you know, it's a lot. Now, I don't have concrete numbers, but what I'm trying to bring to light to you and to the other boards as we move forward is that we've got a significant bill that we're going to have to pay. And so my thought process was this would be a good, listen, would I love that we would have $6 million to use for all kinds of things in our town? Yeah, I would. But we can't ignore that we have over 20, 25, potentially $30 million in costs associated with this situation. So I just want to just let people know and be aware of this, that, you know, we don't have the concrete stuff, but they have given us estimates.
After Ms. Bossie's nice presentation and we had all this money, now this is kind of a buzzkill.
Yeah, well, welcome to my world, Mr. Walsh. Like that
Right,
every
I was
day.
thinking we'd have all this money, and now all of a sudden you're telling us we're further in the hole than when we started the meeting. So,
It's like waking up with a hangover, right? Mr. DeWitt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chris DeWitt. So, thank you first, Selectwoman Kupchik. It is a sobering speech you give, you know, and sobering for a bunch of different reasons. One that even this $6 million, $6 million is barely putting a dent in the. I mean, these overall numbers are, as far as I can tell, in the $20-30 million range. And just like the discussion we had when we talked about the ARPA funding, how could we possibly consider ARPA funding without at least dedicating some of that money to the fill pile? And, you know, when we talk about the capping of 4 to 8 million, I don't know. I think we would really be doing ourselves a disservice by sending this $6 million anywhere else. And you're right. There's so many other things to do, but we're looking at $20-30 million or more bill coming at us. At least this will get us a little further and maybe alleviate the pain in the next 2 or 3 fiscal years. So, you know, I would certainly, just for discussion purposes, I would certainly be in favor of dedicating that revenue to the fill pile.
Ms. Charlton, you had your hand up. I'm sorry, Ms. Kupchak, you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to the section, and thank you, Mr. DeWitt. That's why we put $1 million into the ARPA funds and we're getting some money from the state as well. But I just wanted to, you know, outline a lot of the stuff could potentially not be wrapped up, you know, in time. And I didn't want to take a chance with our ARPA money, you know, to not get a deadline and miss out using that money.
Absolutely.
So we put the million in, and excuse me, we're getting some money from the state, but that's why I didn't specifically put a huger amount in the ARPA funds, because there's so many details that have to be done with DEEP and all the regulatory and all this stuff. And Penfield itself, I mean, I'm just not going to just make a decision without the community. I mean, I want to hear from our community what they think about what ultimately should happen to the building. You know, I want to lay out the cost as we get closer and we get more information about the different scenarios. And then we still have to, you know, work with the regulatory agencies on this contaminated fill. And it's a significant amount of fill under that building, like 5 to 6 feet of it. And it's under the parking lot too. So, you know, this is going to be a process. I'm assuming we're going to have to clean all that first before they'll let us do anything to the building. And then I want the community to weigh in on how they feel about that.
No, and I'm sorry if I made it seem like, you know, that you did anything wrong appropriating the million. I think I'm just saying that ARPA funding, I supported that ARPA funding because of that initial million. But that was the appropriate amount. I agree with you. This, you know, we're still wrangling these numbers, but this 6 million, keeping this 6 million in reserve is just the right thing to do now. So.
Okay, thank you, Mr. DeWitt. Ms. Charlton, you had your hand up, and then Mr. Mottola, I saw you with your hand up too.
Yes, just a couple of comments and then a question. Maybe it's a dumb question, but I guess first, yeah, Jim, buzzkill. That's probably right. This is horrible. Really disheartening. I will say up front, I'm 100% supportive of allocating the excess surplus and putting it aside to deal with whatever these issues are. But you know, maybe the dumb question. I guess I'm a little bit confused about Penfield. You know, from what I understand, and not just what you said tonight, but from previous meetings, you know, do we have a danger to the public? And if we don't, why do we have to remediate? I mean, if there's contaminated fill under an asphalt parking lot, and it's not leaching or it's not presenting a danger to the public, you know, what drives the need for remediation? And likewise on the building, I realized that we screwed up on the building, wanted to complete it. We lost the FEMA reimbursement as a result of that. But, you know, I'm trying to separate those things from the need to remediate and how this connects to health and safety issues. So can you help us understand that a little better?
So yes, excuse me. So yes, Lori, I felt the same way when, you know, when all this, you know, and like I said, in a lot of meetings for a long, long time. And my initial thought about under the parking lot is that it's capped and it shouldn't, but I'm not a regulatory agency, and they've made us do some testing there, and we have to do additional testing. Now, I don't know what the ultimate thing is, but we're hearing that they're saying to us, we're going to have to spend between the numbers I said. Now, as far as Penfield Pavilion, you know, we're required by law to remediate PCB. You can't leave a PCB in place when you find it. So even though it's not dangerous, it's a law. We have to remove it. So that's where we are.
Okay. Yeah, I guess. I mean, obviously, you've spent a lot of time on this, and I understand sometimes the you know, the regulations may not necessarily make sense, but you know, it would be interesting to see how this shakes out over time and see how how much of this is responding to actual health and safety issues. I just, it's hard for me to wrap my head around. Clearly, anything that impacted health and safety of the community, I know that we'd be all advocating to fix it immediately, as was done with playgrounds and fields and other areas. But I guess this one I'm just struggling with, because I just don't, if we're saying this is leaching into the water or into the soil or something like that, I guess the testing will help us understand that. But asphalt itself is kind of toxic, right? So we've got stuff under an asphalt parking lot, and I don't know, I'm scratching my head. So I guess we'll hear more. I'm not challenging it, I'm just trying to understand it. But I guess bottom line, I think that the proposal to allocate this surplus to deal with these future issues is a smart thing to do, and I certainly support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Charlton. And just quick follow-up. Don't we have remediation issues underneath the pavilion itself, not just under the asphalt? Isn't that right, Ms. Cupchet?
Yes, and to Lori's question, they're PCBs, so they're not your run-of-the-mill contamination. That's like the granddaddy of contamination for the DEP, and we're not allowed to leave them in place because over time, obviously, PCBs cause serious, they're cancer-causing things, and you can't just leave them there for future generations to have to deal with them. Once they're located, you have to remediate them. I mean, the whole thing's unfortunate. I wish this never happened, that this was allowed to happen, and that we have to be doing this. But this is where we are.
All right, thank you. Mr. Mottola, Mr. Baldwin had just a follow-up. Do you mind if I go to Mr. Baldwin first and then back to you?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
Mr.
fine.
Baldwin?
Go ahead.
Mr. Baldwin, looked like you had a comment about...
Well, yeah, thank you. I just wanted to add to what the first Selectwoman said, that it's not just PCBs. Certainly that's a huge issue. And as she said, it must be addressed. But there's also other fill material in there, which is simply put not acceptable to FEMA and not acceptable to DEEP in a coastal area such as that. So because of where it's situated along the coastline in a waterway, it must be removed according to regulations. Just to address your some of your questions, Ms. Charlton.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Baldwin. Mr. Mottola, back to you.
Thank you, and yeah, I'm fully support using this money that we've discussed. On the FEMA issue, I thought I hadn't heard before that that we have to now, because as you said, Brenda, that the building is in violation of FEMA and that we need to correct that. I've never heard that before. I thought the punishment, I'm going to use this term loosely, with respect to FEMA is we didn't comply with what they wanted us to do, and therefore the punishment is we don't get any FEMA reimbursement. So it's like there's two different issues there now. You're saying that somehow the building is violating FEMA regulations and we have to correct that. And then if that's the case, then I mean, if the building is in some way violating FEMA regulations, are we able to? We're able to still use the building? Is the building able to be insured? I'm assuming it's insured. What happens next week if we have a hurricane and the building is destroyed? Are we covered? I don't know if you can answer all those questions tonight, but I mean that's the first time I've heard that we have to do something physically to this building to make it in compliance with some type of FEMA regulation. I thought that the issue was just going to be, which is a substantial issue, don't get me wrong, was that we were going to, in some very difficult manner, have to remediate the soil that's underneath the building, which obviously is a huge undertaking. So I guess I'm making more of a statement, but is there, And
So to
maybe
answer your
Jim can
question,
answer,
John, right, so over the last several months, when we were denied the FEMA reimbursement, and then once that was closed out, denied for how many third times a charm, that sort of thing. FEMA then said, and then FEMA sent us a letter saying, okay, now that that's done, we just want you to know you can't keep that building like that because you're violating the rules. And because it's not like a little thing either. It's like the way that the metal trusses around the entire building are not in compliance with FEMA regulations and wave action and all this stuff. So it's not like we could just fix a few little things and be compliant. It's like a major thing.
Okay.
So, obviously it's not good. And I want to, we've got to get a few more things. We've got more information we're gathering, but I'm going to have to, have some public hearings, which, I just can't wait to do, to talk about this with our community and give them some options, and let's get some feedback and hear what people think. People think we should just knock it down and scrap it. Do people think we should move it and try to repair it? Do people think we should move it back? Do people think we should drag it down to Jennings? I don't know. But the bottom line is none of it's going to be cheap. Even just knocking it down isn't going to be cheap.
All right. Well,
and I don't know how the community feels about it.
It sounds like if we go through this, we're going to have to go through this whole process of a building committee. For those of us that
to be perfectly honest, I'm not feeling really comfortable after this building committee.
I know. I think. Let me just say this: for those of us that were on the board, there's plenty of us that were on the board. We went through Penfield, Mr. Mottola, I know Mr. Blair, Jim Walsh, Mr. Witt. Shirley, you were on the board, were you not? This was not an easy thing to put this building up. There was a lot of community discussion about various options, including not having a building at all. And so once we got through that, and then we went to vote, it took some time, but it took some energy, and there was a lot of participation, and we thought we were done. We made our decision, we moved on. This will be the third building in how many years? 6 years? Our original building lasts 100 years. And now we're going through 3 buildings in 6 years? It's beyond 7 years, something? It's beyond upsetting. It's infuriating. Extremely frustrating. And all we can do is bang our head against the wall and go through this process again. So, that Penfield just hits home because I remember what we went through to get done what we got done. All those meetings.
I'm with you, Mr. Brown. It's as frustrating as can be. And it's a wonderful asset for the community.
Right. People enjoy it.
And it is beyond belief that we have to go through this again. So.
It's possible. We obviously, this situation is unbelievable. But we have been talking internally that, if the community decides to want to fix it or whatever, that we would want really more of a project per person, like instead of a building committee, but an actual firm to be sort of responsible and professionals, so that we don't ever face anything like this again.
It's going to cost a ton of money. So, okay. All right.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Mottola. Does anybody have further comments on this? And then I want to just have Mr. Baldwin comment on the process here, because I had some emails going back and forth with our board about how the town and the boards work with the revenue surplus, and I want to make sure we're all clear before we go home tonight and how this works. So, Mr. Walsh?
Yeah, I just want to, at first I think I was shocked by what Brenda says. The more I'm settling in, I'm actually getting worried about this entire situation, and that this was allowed to happen by the previous administration and the corruption or alleged corruption that went on that will be worked out through the criminal courts. And now we're finally seeing a price tag, or at least a range of price tags. To an extent, I have to tell you, I never thought was even possible. I mean, this is absolutely insane. And I hope people are found liable and that we can collect on some money, because this just shows you what, if you're inept on doing stuff, what things can happen. This is just completely insane. It's going to cost us a lot of money. It's going to cost us a lot of projects being pushed back in the pipeline because of our waterfall chart. We have to bond this stuff. And I tell you, I'm just personally just getting angry at this process. The more I'm listening to these numbers, the shock of it is starting to settle in. And, you know, I think the community's got to start talking about it. The taxpayers finally got to know. This is the first time we're hearing a price tag. Something needs to be done here. This will be the third time, if we have to replace that building, the third time we've replaced that building in like 10 years. The previous building stood for 100 years. But to get all of this environmental stuff, to basically allow people to come and use our dump and pile up and, you know, toxins, but then for this town to use those toxins and spread them all over our town is insane. I don't know what else to say about it other than I'm angry, and I'm sure I'll get angry about it. I'm sure many of you are as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Mr. Baldwin, just on procedure, just want to make sure our board is clear on how we move forward, the board's move forward on the surplus, and it looks like we're in agreement with the first select woman. And again, 2 years ago, when we faced this same situation, we had a surplus of about 1.8 million. And what we did was, as a Board of Finance, is we voted to move 1.8 million. And Caitlin, you know, you can correct me if my numbers wrong, but 1.8 million into debt service. And then we took 800,000 of that 1.8 and we put it into a fund specifically for the fill pile. At the time, Mr. Carey was responsible for the 800,000, and when he went through the 800,000, he came back to our board and asked to transfer the 1 million parts of it back into that fill pile fund so he could use it until it was all depleted. At this point, that money is depleted. So now what we're saying is we're going to take, sounds like what we're in agreement, let's take 6.3 million, put it back into the fill pile line item, and then as we use it, we'll vote on how, you know, as we get our vendors and we get our, an agreement from the Board of Selectmen that they're ready to utilize these funds, will come to us and we can transfer them out. So, Mr. Baldwin, just, you could help us along with the beginnings of this process so we're all on the same page on the authority and responsibilities of the Board of Selectmen, the Board of Finance, and the RTM with this revenue surplus.
Thank you. I'd be happy to go over that with you. And in fact, we already have gone over it, because if you remember my deliberations about the ARPA funding and what to do with it and what process is appropriate in that situation, I cited a statute 7-348, and it was the most analogous situation that I could find. If you remember, I describe it as trying to put the round peg in the square hole. But this is actually a situation where it's a round peg into a round hole. It's that statute perfectly addresses the situation before you, and that statute says quite explicitly that it is a request to be made by the department or the administration, and upon recommendation by the Board of Selectmen to this board for additional expenditures beyond that which was budgeted. So that's exactly what you're going to do here, presumably, from the sounds of it, and then it goes on to the RTM for their vote and ultimate approval if they choose to do so. So it's really the same the same process as we discussed under ARPA, but it's more clear because the situation is one which the statute speaks to directly.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Baldwin. Any questions for the town attorney? Okay. Being done, any further discussions on the revenue before we move on to item? Mr. Baldwin, thank you for being here.
You're welcome. Thank you.
So we're going to move on to item number 8. Mr. Kupchak, thank you for the update, I guess.
Sorry.
All right, it's getting late, but it's early enough to go home and have a scotch and think about it. Item number...
Kudos, Mr. Chairman.
We'll go to item number 8 to hear, consider, and act upon the draft minutes of September 9th, 2021 and September 21st, 2021. Can I have a motion to put these minutes before us? Mr. DeWitt, seconded by Mr. Mottola. Any comments and questions on the minutes of September 9th? Okay, all those in favor of approving the draft minutes of September 9th, 2021, please say aye. Any opposed? It is unanimous approved. September 21st, 2021. Any comments, questions on the minutes of September 21st? Seeing none, all those would approve the draft minutes of September 21st, 2021, please say aye. Any opposed? Okay, it is unanimous in approval of those minutes. It takes us to item number 9. To hear, consider, and act upon any communications. Ms. Kupchak or Mr. Schmidt, do you have any communications for us?
I have nothing to add.
Okay, thank you. So I just want to discuss quickly upcoming meetings that we have and both several ones as well have to deal with, including the waterfall. So, as you know, the Board of Ed has asked us to hear and consider and approve a bonding resolution for the Roger Ludlow Middle School, and they want us to do this, all the boards, in October. And so we agreed to accommodate, or I agreed to accommodate as best we could as a Board of Finance. And so what we did was we put it on the schedule. The Board of Selectmen put it on the schedule. Ms. Kupchak did, for their October 18th meeting. Assuming it gets approved, and also, Ms. Kupchak, I assume you're going to have the item that we just talked about, the surplus, 6.3 million, and your recommendations will be part of that meeting on October 18th as well?
Yes, that's my intention, Mr. Chairman, is to put it on the agenda for the Board of Selectmen for consideration, and then if it passes, my recommendation is to A, accept the funds as revenue, and then B, recommend that the funds be put in the fill pile account that we have been using throughout this nightmare.
Okay.
So, and then send it to you, and then your board is to consider it, and then send it to the RTM.
Okay. Then the original plan was to, the original plan was to have the Roger Ludlow Middle School roof boat and the waterfall discussion on October 21st. Okay, so that has changed. We will not hear the waterfall until what I'm thinking is November 9th, which is our first meeting in November. Okay, and the reason being is October 21st is the League of Women Voters debate for our candidates running for town office. Now, we still have to vote before the October 25th because the RTM needs to hear the Roger Ludlow, the roof project, and we want them to hear, I'm sure Ms. Bossi wants them to hear the recommendation from the Board of Selectmen, and by that time the Board of Finance, of the revenue surplus. So we need to vote after October 18th, but before October 25th. Now, I was traveling October 18th, 19th, and 20th. I'd be out of town right now. And this could change. I'll keep you up to date. I'm thinking of having this vote on the 21st of October, but at 8, starting at 8. But I have to get more information from the League of Women Voters. You know, I don't know what time that debate starts. I tried to request, they haven't. It starts at 7. Ms. Marmee, does the Board of Finance go first? Okay. It generally doesn't take more than an hour. So we could start a meeting at 8 o'clock. We would just have 2 voting items on it. It shouldn't be long. We know about the roofing project. There'll be a discussion. We just discussed this. And so it shouldn't be too long of a night. The roofing project will probably take longer than this, or discussions tonight, right? The Roger Ludlow Middle School roof is on the waterfall. I think for next year, Ms. Vitale, but we're moving it, changing it with McKinley. Is that correct? Not to get into this discussion tonight. I don't even know, but it was on the waterfall, right?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, it was on the waterfall. It's just getting moved up a year just because of the need. The roof is leaking, which is why it's being put forward. And as Mr. Papa George shared, putting before the town boards just so we can get it out to bid. As was shared at the previous meeting, and First Selectman Kupchak also shared some of the challenges with just getting contractors lined up. Figure if it doesn't go out to bid within the next month, we run the risk of the project not being able to be done next summer. So just concerned about the health and safety of the building and the kids involved in it. So I appreciate the Board of Selectmen and, well, actually all the town boards fast tracking this.
Okay, so the plan would be to vote on the 21st and then over to the RTM, assuming it passes on the 25th. And then November 9th, the waterfall. And then we have a quarterly on the 16th. So I just wanted to bring everyone up to date on the changes and how these meetings look like right now. If there's any changes to them, I'll get right back to you. I realize it's a little inconvenient to start at 8, and I also realize that some of us might be traveling as well. So, any thoughts or comments on the meetings? Okay. Ms. Vitale, thank you and Mr. Peterson, thank you for being here, just in case something like that came up, right? Appreciate it. Okay. So we are on to item number 10, which is to adjourn. Can I have a motion to adjourn, please? Ms. Charlton, seconded by Mr. DeWitt. All those in favor, say aye. That is unanimous. Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Just check.